This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Distinguished presidential historian Michael Genovese explains what it takes to be a good president, and he says Donald Trump would not be an effective one. Voting analyst Daniel McGraw says there is a death gap between the two parties, with many more Republican voters checking out than Democrats. And sociologist Andrew Cherlin says only people with decent combined incomes are getting married these days. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. One of America's most distinguished historians, Michael Genovese, describes the powers and limitations of the presidency and says Donald Trump would find that barking orders is not going to work. And we say hello to political science professor Michael Genovese, president of the World Policy Institute at Loyola Marymount University, an expert on the presidency, and the author of Presidential Leadership in an Age of Change. Michael Genovese, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
And nice to have you with us as well. Isn't part of the problem of a weak presidency due to the American people having perhaps expectations that are too high for any president to meet, given the limitations of the office?
Absolutely. There is very clearly an expectations gap. The difference between expectations that the public has, demands that they place on the presidency, and the power resources he has to deliver. And I can understand why that happens. It happens because presidents and candidates contribute to it with their campaign promises. And that elevates expectations. The media distorts what government is. With so much focus and attention on the presidency, people begin to think that the president has more power than he or she really does have. And so what happens is you begin to think that the president is the government when there's still that Congress in the background and checks and balances. And so the public also contributes because they're very impatient. They want things yesterday. They want more services for less tax dollars. And so what that creates is this power expectation gap where the expectations are so inflated, so unreasonably high given the powers that a president has. And there's very good reason why we've limited presidential power. From the framers on, we've been very suspicious of centralized power as a country. But we want our cake and eat it too, and that's the contradiction. We want presidents to do a lot, but not have too much power to do it. That's a paradox that we need to resolve.
Now, you say the founders defanged the presidency. Why did they do it, and is it a good idea to look for ways to refang the office?
Well, they defanged the presidency because they had this incredible fear of the monarchy. The intellectual climate of the revolution was anti-executive authority in nature. Now, the executive at that time, the king, didn't have as much power as the framers really thought because Parliament was on the rise. But they needed someone and something to fight a revolution against, and so they wrapped up everything into this anti-monarchical sentiment. And reading the Declaration of Independence, apart from its magnificent introduction where it states its principles, if you read further on, and most people don't because it's actually quite boring, it's just a laundry list of accusations against the crown. And so they embodied everything bad into the monarchy, and that was the big boogaboo of the time. And so then when it came time to form a government, anti-executive sentiment was so strong that they, in the first Articles of Confederation, had no executive. That's just how extreme they were. Well, of course, that can't work, and they realized it, and when they made a constitution, they did include a presidency with some independence and some power. But it was still defanged because the memories and the lingering distrust of executive authority was still very much on their minds. And while a few of the framers, Hamilton, for example, argued for a strong central government with a strong, or as he said, an energetic executive, most of the men at the Constitutional Convention were very suspicious of executive authority, and they saw it, as one delegate said, as a fetus of monarchy that had to be stopped. And so we had a revolution against the king, and so we built in all kinds of limits against a president becoming a king.
We're speaking with political science professor Michael Genovese, president of the World Policy Institute at Loyola Marymount University, and the author of Presidential Leadership in an Age of Change. Throughout history, Congress has worked in concert with the president on foreign policy and in war. Why is President Obama the only apparent exception to that rule?
Well, we have a long tradition of this notion that politics ends at the water's edge. And while we haven't adhered to it scrupulously over time, we've had our moments when, in fact, the national interest has come before the partisan or personal interest. Why haven't we seen that? Again, I think that's a function of the hyper-partisanship that we have today. It's a function of the very, very low trust the people have in government and the kinds of sort of media coverage that you sometimes get on the shout and scream cable TV and radio stations. And so we have a kind of hyper-partisanship that is designed to say, well, look, what we have to do is just get rid of whoever's in office. And Mitch McConnell, when President Obama was first elected, said, my first and most important job is to make Obama a one-term president. And then the Republican leadership in the House, from the night that Obama was first inaugurated, agreed that they will do nothing to support the president. Well, that's a kind of hyper-partisanship that puts party first and nation second. And to the extent that we have that, we are a very divided country, and our foreign policy will be divisive. And you can see that in the recent debate that we've been having over the Iran nuclear deal. That deal has been captured by partisanship. When the entire rest of the world, 90-some-odd% of leaders and governments are in support of it, we have a big argument over it, and the argument is essentially over partisan power. And so President Obama had the very bad fortune to become president at a time when hyperpartisanship was at its highest. He made very concerted efforts to become a more nonpartisan or post-partisan political system, but he never was successful. That effort failed, and it probably was doomed from the start. And therefore, foreign policy, as important as it is, gets swept up in the partisan conflicts, and that's what we're seeing today.
And given House and Senate leadership comments the night of the inauguration, it probably would not have mattered one way or the other. This was going to happen to him, right? It's too bad.
You're right. I think it was inevitable because it was in the cards at that particular time. I don't know if race played a part in it. I'm hoping that it didn't, and I'm willing to believe that it didn't. But something triggered something in the Republicans that they said, we're going to go way beyond what we've normally done. We're going to say no to everything, even something that might be good.
Yeah, before he's even had a chance to take the oath. How would you rate Obama on a presidential leadership scale?
Boy, it's a really mixed bag, because if you look at his first 2 years, he was very successful. Of course, he had control of the Congress. The Democrats had the House and the Senate in their pocket, and so he was able to use that to get a tremendously high percentage of his proposals through Congress, one of the highest in history. The Affordable Care Act, which is the centerpiece, but also the economic stimulus package. The first midterm election, though, when he lost control, is when not only did he lose control of Congress, but he lost control of the agenda, and he kind of lost his groove. And his groove didn't come back until really in the last year or so, when he decided that, efforts at working with Congress are going to fail because there's no way that they're going to work with me. So I'm going to have to govern as much as I can through executive authority. Now, I'm always a little uncomfortable when presidents do that, but you can certainly understand why a president who faces a Congress that's not going to say nothing but no, 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 might say, well, we've got to do something on climate control. We've got to do something about immigration. We've got to do something related to Cuba or the Iran nuclear deal. And if Congress won't join me, I'm going to try to go there as much as I can alone. And so he got his groove back, and he's getting things done now. But how would I rate him? The cop-out answer is that it's an incomplete. But I think if you stop today and said give him a rating, I'd give him something in the high B range right now.
Mm-hmm. Is he a prime example of the irony that a president's greatest power comes early in his term, at a time when he is perhaps the least knowledgeable about how to use it?
Well, presidents do have some authority at the beginning. Number one, you've just come off a successful election. Number two, you probably, at least the first time, brought some members of your own party in on your coattails. or at least you might argue that. You might be able to argue you've got a mandate to govern. Your opposition will try to take the measure of you early, and that'll take some time, so they may not be quite ready to jump on you right away. The media is in a wait-and-see mode. Is this guy going to be good or bad? Does he have it, what it takes, or not? And so they'll be a little bit more, let's say, forgiving, if you would. And so there's that honeymoon period when presidents have more authority than they normally would. That authority quickly dissipates. The honeymoon usually ends pretty quickly, and reality sets in. And so I think that was one of the things with Obama. But more importantly than a honeymoon is having a majority in Congress. And so when you're least experienced in the White House, you have the most power normally, and that power fades fast. And then as you learn more, your power is more diminished. It's kind of another one of those paradoxes of the American presidency.
Again, we're speaking with political science professor Michael Genovese, president of the World Policy Institute at Loyola Marymount University, and the author of Presidential Leadership in an Age of Change. In an age of instant communication and globalization, could a weak presidency harm America's strength as a world power?
The answer is yes, and the more elaborate answer is globalization is having such a profound effect on how American power and presidential power is changing that we haven't even recognized it yet. Globalism takes power out of the hands of nations and out of the hands of leaders and puts more power into the hands of markets, of corporations, and of international organizations and international agreements. And so whereas a president used to be able to lead as an individual, today there are virtually no problems, and this is a function of globalization, that can be solved on our own. President Obama very wisely recognized that recently when he talked about his initiative on climate change, where he said, no matter what we do, if we can't bring other nations into the fold, it's going to fail. And so that whole notion of, from now on, multilateralism and cooperation and consensus will be the keys to leadership. It's very different from the old kind of command model that we're comfortable with, but that no longer works in a world of globalization. And so what's going to happen is the leader of tomorrow is going to have to be a consensus builder, bring people together, multilateral agreements. It's going to be a convener of meetings. That's very undramatic, and it doesn't always make for great headlines. And America's not going to like that. I think it was Bill Clinton who said, Americans like their leaders strong, even when wrong, rather than weak, even when right. And so presidents are not going to be able to project the kind of strength that, say, the George Bush swagger produced. That made us feel good at a time when 9/11 occurred, but it was very dysfunctional in the long run. And so that era is gone, and presidents are going to have to lead in a very different way. They're going to have to exercise what I call leveraged leadership, which is you have to leverage power, not just your own, but others. George H.W. Bush did that extremely well in the Gulf War. It was a masterful job, deserves tremendous credit for that. Obama has tried to do that, but his critics are harping at, oh, you're leading from behind, oh, you're not showing American strength and resolve, when in fact it's a very different world that we're in today, a world of globalization, a world in which power is so diffused and so fragmented that presidents don't have the clout that a John Kennedy, an LBJ, or Richard Nixon had. And so in this new kind of world that we're living in of globalization, presidents are going to have to change because power has changed. And if we aren't on the crest of that wave, we're going to be the victims of it.
And the types of war that we're fighting have changed as well. I mean, it's a completely different animal that he's up against right now than what we were up against even 20, 30 years ago.
That's right. We're not fighting against nation states. We're fighting against faceless coalitions, faceless terrorist groups, organizations that don't generally have a home base that you can strike. And so it's a very different, more diffuse kind of war for a president to fight with more diffuse power.
Now, you talk about the need for presidential vision, use of power, negotiating skills, and the ability to mobilize followers. Haven't you just described Donald Trump?
Oh, dear Lord, please save me. No. No, Donald Trump does have some of those qualities, but not all of them. The first thing you mentioned was vision. I don't think a catchphrase or a cliche is vision. A vision is an integrated view of where we ought to be going how we ought to get there, what sacrifices we need to make to get there, but what the world will look like when we get there. And a vision is to create, and Ronald Reagan did a very, very good job of this, we need to say. He created a vision, a picture in people's minds that they said, I get it and I want to go there. We lack that today. And Donald Trump, Make America Great Again, is a cliche. It's a nice cliche. It works. You can fit it on a bumper sticker, but it's not going to take us very far.
Sure.
And in terms of the other things you mentioned, use of power, we don't know if he can use power because we've never seen him in the world of politics. The world of business is very different. There, the command model can work. But in politics, you have to get willing followers. In his businesses, he can command people to do things. In politics, was the old Harry Truman said of Eisenhower, poor Ike, he's going to sit there and bark orders all day and people aren't going to do what he wants. Politics is about building a consensus, building a coalition. It's about bringing people together and about bringing syncopation. And the Donald is about barking orders, which, again, is great for television and may work in the business world, but doesn't work in politics. You remember H. Ross Perot when he used to say, I'm going to make government run like a business. You can't.
Right.
It just isn't, and it doesn't work. And so we need to get rid of that misnomer. And so I think Trump has some very useful skills. They're probably better suited to business. I don't think they translate very well into politics.
Okay. Political science professor Michael Genovese, president of the World Policy Institute at Loyola Marymount University, and the author of Presidential Leadership in an Age of Change. Michael Genovese, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Voting expert Daniel McGraw says the Democrats have a built-in advantage in 2016. Republican voters are older and are dying faster. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Your standard governor, Congress critter, and other elected officials routinely insist that they represent the people. But when it comes to making public policy, do they actually represent you or Mr. Money, who writes big campaign checks? Right. Any pretension that we live in a self-governing democratic republic is gone. It's been snuffed out by a tiny club of big-money donors, only about 600 people out of our population of 330 million. They've empowered themselves to choose candidates, control the public debate, and bend public policy to their selfish interests. Both major political parties are complicit in this kleptocratic transformation, Republicans by aggressively pushing it, and Democrats by passively acquiescing to it. While Barack Obama has done nothing to stop this money perversion of democracy, he's at least made noise about making the thieves disclose their theft. But noise is not action, and the GOP's enablers of the thievery have even moved to kill Obama's modest disclosure ideas. In June, for example, House Republicans quietly voted to prohibit the SEC, the shareholders' watchdog, from requiring CEOs to tell the corporate owners how much of their money is being spent on particular political candidates. Another GOP backroom proviso would keep the IRS from disclosing the names of corporate tax law manipulators that use so-called social welfare groups to funnel money anonymously into partisan political campaigns. Also, a third Republican hide-and-seek provision would allow corporations that get billions of dollars in taxpayer funds to avoid telling us the names of lawmakers they're showering with campaign cash. This is Jim Hightower saying the torrent of secret corporate money in our elections is hosing our democratic ideals and possibilities, blasting the people out of the process, and imposing big money governance over America.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown. even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Journalist and voting expert Daniel McGraw says Republicans have an actuarial problem because so many of their voters are older than Democrats. But, he warns, if the Republicans concentrate on economic issues, they may get younger voters to listen to them. And we say hello to Daniel J. McGraw, Cleveland area freelance journalist and author. He has served as a senior editor for U.S. News and World Report. His work has also appeared in The Village Voice, Reason Magazine, Salon, Politico, The Guardian, and many others. Daniel McGraw, thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Hello, how are you today, Jim?
Doing well, thank you. You've done some demography crunching, and the news looks good for Democrats, at least on the presidential level. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's great in kind of one way or another. I just have this idea, and it was actually after the 2012 election. I heard Rush Limbaugh and Karl Rove saying that the reason Mitt Romney lost was because the people that voted for John McCain in 2008 just stayed home. And I figured, well, maybe they stayed home on account of maybe they didn't vote on account of more of them sort of being dead. So I started crunching the numbers, and folks thought that this was a strange thing, but I found out folks had never done it before. And I found out that if we take a look at the voters from 2012, and we use actuarial tables and exit polling, et cetera, we find out that those that voted for Obama, 2.3 million, will not be around in 2016. But those that voted for Romney, about 2.75 million, won't be around. There's a difference of 450,000. Now, that can be a big difference. It can be a small difference. I liken it to this, that if you're starting a football game and the ref gives you a penalty and says that you're down sort of 3-0 before it starts, that's not a good thing. It still means you can win easily, but it's not good to be down at the start.
So this may not be enough to ensure a Democratic victory with that disparity in the death gap, if you will.
No, it isn't at all. However, I found that the disparity among the Republicans is rising because there's a disparity between 2008 and 2012, the difference between the number of deaths, and I just hate putting it that way, but that's the best way to put it. The number of deaths, the difference between the Democrats and Republicans was 300,000 between 2008 and 2012. Between 2012 and 2016, it rises to 450,000. Now, that difference was there was a higher turnout in 2008 as well. So it kind of means they have more leaving than are coming in. That's not good for any business. That's not good for politics. It is not a kind of good thing, and they have to address that.
We're speaking with Daniel McGraw, freelance journalist and author. And, Daniel, even though the Republican base is older and thus closer to mortality than the Democratic base, don't the old folks vote in much greater numbers, or at least percentages, than millennials?
Oh, yes. And see, that's where this all kind of balances out. Now, see, those under 30, in 2000, they had a 40% turnout. 2004, 49%. They peaked at 51% 2008, and then they went down to 45% in 2012. Most are expecting them to go back to the 40% level in 2016 for a number of factors, mostly because Obama isn't on the ticket. The older folks tend to come in at about 70%, and that's consistent all the time. So you have older people dying off, but they vote in higher percentages. And then you have the larger number of young people coming in, but they vote in lower numbers. So it kind of balances out, and it's hard to predict how all these things are going to kind of come out in the next election.
Yeah. Now, of course, presidential elections are not strictly national in scope. They are state by state.
Yes.
So do the demographics of the swing states play one way or another for either party?
I took a look at some states, because if I was going to take a look at every state, I'd have my mind blow out because of excess math. So in this case, what we did is we took a look at Florida, Virginia, and Ohio. And it doesn't look like it's going to make much difference in Virginia and Ohio. Now, Florida, of course, is its own sort of country, so to speak, in terms of its demographics, and it tends to vote crazy and no one knows. Because there was it's always been close down there. The last election, the difference, Obama won by sort of 57,000 votes. Obama kind of won the state by 73,000 votes, but there's going to be 57,000 more people dead that voted for Romney than voted for Obama. So it's because of the close numbers, it could make a difference. However, if I would say any party that is banking on this should realize that, especially in Florida, things are always in ebb and flow, people moving there, et cetera. However, in a few states, this might make a difference. But again, all we're talking about is a few states here.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you look at something like Florida, I mean, that's, it's a retiree state,
Yes.
I mean, folks go to the warmer weather and they settle there. Probably you could say that about the Southwest as well. So, and it is in the big picture of things, it is just a small slice of the pie.
Right, but here's how I'm kind of viewing it, is that a lot of people don't understand politics is just kind of moving that needle a point or two, okay? And so if you're looking at states that are these swing states, as we say, moving 1 percentage point or two makes a huge difference. And so in Florida, what was it? In the sort of George W. Bush, he sort of won the Florida by 537 votes in 2000. Okay, so Florida's always been real close, and because people tend to, especially in the older age group, they tend to stay with the same party, okay? Election to election. Having that core base kind of not being there as much is a key.
Mm-hmm. Well, and immediately after the 2012 elections, the Republicans did a post-mortem and quickly figured out that they have to appeal to younger voters. But given the Republican views on immigration, high education, climate change, same-sex marriage, for example, how can they possibly do that? How can they appeal to the young voters?
They are making a huge error here. I have a daughter who's she's in college age. She's in Texas. Okay, she's against she's against sort of government programs. She's more of a libertarian type, let's say. Okay, and I see that among her age group. Okay, she likes to shoot guns, okay, because she's in Texas and everyone does. But she is a feminist. She hates how the state has gotten rid of Planned Parenthood programs. She hates how on the kind of global warming things, how they don't even consider science. And on the same-sex marriage, as soon as someone says that they're against that, her and her friends are out. It's not even it is not even something, kind of how they see it, is not a moral thing, not as a sort of civil rights thing. If you're against same-sex marriage, most of them say, "What? How could you?" It's like it's a standard for them. And if the Republicans focus on their older base and they keep saying that same thing over and over again, they have no chance.
Yeah. Will young people vote for candidates like Clinton, Sanders, or Warren who are near or over 70?
I don't think that matters. I don't think the age matters. Most of the young voters think, and I also get this from my daughter, I'm in my mid-50s and I'm old. So it doesn't matter much. I just think that I don't think the age factor. I mean, I heard that after I had that story run about the age factor of sort of voters and how they're dying off. Everyone said, "Well, how about Clinton? She's going to be 69 at election day." And I said, I'm not talking about those that are running. I am talking about the voters. Voters, I don't think care too much. And I think that as our population is aging, I wouldn't say that being 69 or 70 is even going to matter much.
Mm-hmm. Now, given the demographics that you've laid out for us today, how can the Democrats blow it?
Oh, easily. I mean, one of the things that it depends on the Republicans, okay? Now, if the Republicans concentrate on economic issues, okay, they're going to get my daughter and her age group. They are going to get them to listen to them, okay, because this group is facing huge debt after college. The economy has not rebounded in ways that is helping them out. A lot of them are sort of coming out of college, have no job prospects, et cetera. They're seeing the kind of government because they've just known how the colleges have kind of treated them, et cetera. They will be open to that message. But as I said before, if they tie that in with anti-Planned Parenthood things, anti-global warming stuff, anti-same-sex marriage, it is not going to work. But if it is going to be an issue because if the sort of Democrats tie themselves into too many entitlement issues, et cetera, I don't think they would lose the younger voters, but they wouldn't get as many in them. And there's also the factor of kind of turnout. And it's going to be lower turnout among young voters just mainly because Obama's not running this time, okay? So, that is going to go down. And as we talked about before, if you're talking about a point here or a point there, it matters.
Okay. Daniel McGraw, Cleveland area freelance journalist and author, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Daniel, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Okay.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Sociologist Andrew Cherlin says there is a marriage gap, with only those couples with the prospect of decent incomes actually legalizing their union. And we say hello to Andrew Cherlin, professor of public policy in the sociology department at Johns Hopkins University, also the author of Labor's Love Lost, The Rise and Fall of the Working Class Family. Professor Andrew Cherlin, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Great to be on the broadcast.
And nice to have you with us, of course. You write about something called the working class, which is a term that really has fallen into disfavor. But you say a whole lot of Americans fall into that category. So what defines someone as working class?
So I'm thinking that we need to make a distinction between people with four-year college degrees or more who are doing pretty well, still struggling some, but doing pretty well in our economy, and the people who don't have a four-year college degree. The people in the middle who might have a high school degree, a bit of training, a few courses, but nothing more. It's that middle group that I think is different from the college-educated middle class, and that might merit the label working class. These are the sons and daughters of the people who used to take the blue-collar factory jobs that we had many of back a generation or two. These are the people who in Baltimore whose parents and grandparents worked at the steel companies and the auto assembly plants that are now out of business. That group is struggling a lot, and their family lives have changed and some might say deteriorated as a result. And I wrote a book about them and their family lives because I think that middle, moderately educated group, the one we might call the working class, is having a lot of trouble, and we're not paying attention to them.
You also say that the virtual disappearance of unions has been a major factor in the decline of the working class, and that unions should be revived. But in this political climate, how can that happen?
It's going to be difficult for sure, and we can't turn it around in a short period of time. But we've made choices such as not raising the minimum wage. We've made choices such as restricting the ability of unions to organize that have not been good for workers. I think what could help, maybe one of the few things that could help, is if the job market gets tighter. I mean, look at Walmart. They just raised wages recently for their workers, not out of magnanimity, but because they need the workers and they're having trouble finding them. What could help unions is a tighter labor market where employers suddenly find that they have to pay attention to what workers need. With a weak labor market, it's going to be really hard, as you say, but we shouldn't give up because unions not only raise the wages of the people in the unions, they raised the wages of people in the same neighborhoods and cities who weren't in the unions. They were a real force for the working class, and we miss them, and workers aren't doing well without them.
What effect would raising the minimum wage have on the working class?
I think it would have a great effect. There are many people who are getting the minimum wage. There are many young adults, let's say, who are getting the minimum wage or something close to it. It would have the effect of allowing young adults to get in the labor market and support themselves better and foresee a stable future for themselves and foresee stable family lives in the future. Sure, your average 40-year-old is probably not working for the minimum wage anyway, but your average 20-year-old might. And if we raise the minimum wage, employers might then boost wages that were above the minimum but still low. There could be a bump effect that bumps wages up throughout the lower part of the job market, and that can help lots of people. Will this cause a drop in employment? You know, the economists I talk to say that the minimum wage is worth much less in purchasing power than it used to, and at the very least we could restore it in purchasing power without having a drop in employment.
We're speaking with Andrew Cherlin, professor of public policy in the sociology department at Johns Hopkins University, and he's the author of Labor's Love Lost, The Rise and Fall of the Working Class Family. The technical and manual jobs that you talk about for the working class,
right?
Aren't those exactly the jobs that have gone overseas, and some perhaps permanently?
Yes, there are still some of those technical jobs, but they're very different. You're not in an assembly line anymore. What you're doing as one of the factory workers who still have jobs is operating a big, huge $1 million machine that's doing the work that 10 workers used to have on the assembly line. Instead, you need to know some computer control language that controls this big machine. For you, if you can get that job, and there still are some, it's a really good job. In order to get it, you can't just graduate from high school. You've got to get some education, say, in a community college. So there are some jobs left in the middle. Think of the growing health sector. Think of people taking care of medical records. Think of X-ray technicians. Think of therapists of various kinds. There are still some jobs out there. They require advanced training, though, in a way that the factory job didn't in the 1950s. That's why doing something in the educational system for people with a high school degree to get them ready for the jobs that are there should be a good part of the solution for helping the working class.
But perhaps we need to look differently at our education system and the way that we're bringing people into these jobs?
I think we do. You know, we've long had the American dream that everyone should have a 4-year college degree. And I support the idea that everyone should have the opportunity to have a 4-year college degree who wants one. But there are many young adults who who would prefer to do something else, who would like to do something else, and perhaps are better suited for doing something else than the four-year college degree. And for those people, we ought to strengthen community colleges, which train people for professions and jobs that still exist. So President Obama has said that he wants to make community college free for everybody, which is a worthy goal. But I would take some of the money for that, and I would pour it into trying to increase the graduation rates for community colleges, which are very low, like 35%, and get people ready and trained for the jobs that are out there, even if they're not as many as there used to be. So four-year college degree, great, but that shouldn't be the end point of what we do for education. We really ought to think about a large group of people for whom something else, more than high school, but less than a bachelor's degree, could be the right way to go. That's what I'd like to see us think about when we think about educational change.
You know, you cite an interesting poll result in which when people were asked what class they were in, 44% said middle class and 44% said working class, which leaves only 12%. We know that figure can't be correct. So are we talking about people maybe even just being ashamed of their status?
I think that's right. People don't spontaneously say they're in the working class, but if you give them the term in a list and say, which one are you, as many people pick it as pick middle class. So people out there know that they're not doing as well as the middle class. They may not want to talk about it that much, but they understand that there's a prosperous group out there and that they're not part of it. And it's a huge group. As you said, 44% of people in a national poll pick the term working class to best describe them rather than middle class. Who are those folks? Most of them had a high school degree, but not a college degree. That's the group that's saying we're working class. They know that the job market is not nearly as good for them as it was for their parents and grandparents. And they know they're struggling as a result, and they'd like us to focus some attention on them, and we should.
Again, we're speaking with Andrew Cherlin, professor of public policy in the sociology department at Johns Hopkins University, and the name of his book, Labor's Love Lost, The Rise and Fall of the Working Class Family. We touched on a little bit about things we can do with the working class, but from a policymaking standpoint, what can policymakers do to address the problems of the working class, which obviously are different from the middle and lower class?
They can provide more income support. There seems to be broad support, even across party lines today, for increasing a program called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which provides an annual tax refund to people with low earnings, and that will help low-income workers. That's a policy choice we could make. We could expand that program. We could make it more available to young men who aren't living with kids, for whom not many can use the program right now. So we can expand income support for low-income workers and at least make it possible for them to approach the poverty level or get beyond it if they're working full-time. I think we ought to also do something about the conditions of work. It's very hard to make a living if your employer will only employ you 25 hours a week. Worse yet, if the employer says that those hours are variable and that if you take another job so that you're not available when they call you, they're going to cut you back. I think we ought to do something to improve the conditions of work so low-income workers can get hours, can take two jobs, can by working hard, make it across the poverty line, and we ought to help them do that. So sure, there are steps we can take, steps to help workers. We should do them. And I think I'm hoping that we will.
You have written extensively about the relationship between income and marriage. What is the connection and why is it important?
For a marriage to work, people need to believe that they have a stable source of income that's going to last for a while. Those are the only people who are getting married these days, the ones who say, okay, we put our incomes together, we're confident we're going to be able to make it economically. And many of those people are the ones with college degrees. They're still marrying, and they're still waiting until after they marry to have kids. They can see a stable, prosperous economic future. They're combining two incomes, and they're doing pretty well. People with less secure incomes and lower incomes just aren't sure they can make it in a marriage. And today, when living together and having a kid outside of marriage are much more acceptable than was the case a couple of generations ago, today many of them are living with a partner and going ahead and having kids in short-term stable relationships that have lots of turnover and are good for kids. So there's a huge line between the kind of stable, decent incomes that the college grads are able to get and the people below who don't see and can't find that kind of stable income and therefore aren't marrying. So I see a huge difference in the marriage gap, if you will, between people with stable incomes at the top and people with less stable incomes. The divorce rate's actually been going down for people with high incomes. They're making it okay. But it's not been going down for people without college degrees who just don't have the economic stability that they would like.
Andrew Cherlin, professor of public policy in the sociology department at Johns Hopkins University. He is the author of Labor's Love Lost, The Rise and Fall of the Working Class Family. Professor, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Very good. I would enjoy it.
Thank you very much. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Michael Genovese, Daniel McGraw, and Andrew Cherlin. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.